So the things that we're going to cover today, number one, we're going to talk about what is Zapier. So for those of you who might have heard a few things about it, are just, wondering what it is, we're going to talk about that first. Number two, we're going to talk about triggers and actions. So we're going to be discussing kind of what those two things are in Zapier. Then number three, we're going to be talking about collecting sample data. Number four, mapping that sample data. And then number five, we're going to talk about filtering, and it'll all make sense as we go through this material here. So number one, we're going to talk about what is Zapier. So Zapier is a tool that helps you automate repetitive tasks between two or more apps. So Zapier actually has 3,000 plus apps that you can use. And basically, when an event happens in one app, Zapier can tell another app to perform or do a particular action. So a better way to think about it is that Zapier is kind of like a bridge between two apps. So for example, if I'm doing something in this app, once something happens there, I want something else to happen in another app. Now, there's a couple ways you can make this happen. One, if whatever platform you're using has a direct integration with that particular app, then you don't need Zapier. So let me give you an example. In Dubsado, if you're integrated with Stripe, Square, or PayPal, one of our three payment processors, you don't need Zapier to collect a payment because we have a direct integration with them. But for platforms like Calendly, maybe you're not using the Dubsado scheduler, you can use Calendly and Dubsado together. And that's actually what we're going to do today, is link up Calendly and Dubsado together. And so you can just see how that works. So it's basically a bridge between two apps. So here we go. Here's an example of what we're actually going to do today. When this happens, which is called the trigger, and that's going to be making a new appointment in Calendly, we want to do this, which is called the action. And that's going to be create a new project in Dubsado. So the trigger in Dubsado, we're actually going to jump into that next, triggers and actions. Triggers is in Dubsado are going to be when this particular thing happens, and actions are going to be kind of the result of that happening. So if you're familiar with Dubsado workflows, we have actions and then triggers, where this is going to be the first thing that happens in action, and then a trigger is something that happens after that. In Zapier, it's actually flipped. So it's a little bit different than Dubsado, but in Zapier, the trigger is what happens in one app, and then the action is what happens in the other app. So trigger followed by an action. Now in Dubsado, these are going to be the 5 different triggers that you can use. And before I dive into these, I just want to say that because there are 3,000 plus apps that Zapier has available, you do have to do some research on what triggers and actions are available with the certain apps you're trying to use. I don't have all 3,000 apps memorized. So if you do have questions on, hey, if you're using Airtable, what actions and triggers do they have? I don't know those off the top of my head, but you're going to see as we jump into Zapier how you can kind of find what triggers and actions they have built into their specific apps. But with Dubsado, I can kind of talk through the triggers and actions that we have built into the system. So if you're using Dubsado as a trigger, so let's talk about that first. If you're wanting it to be where something happens in Dubsado and I need it to do an action in another app. So this is where you're starting with Dubsado and then you're going out to a different app, whether it's Trello, or maybe you're wanting to put something on an Asana board. Maybe you want to receive a text message, anything along those lines. Maybe you want a new lead to go onto a MailChimp list or something like that. When this happens, we have 5 different triggers that you can play around with, where once one of these 5 things happen, something that can happen in another platform. So if you have a new project as a lead in Dubsado or as a new job, if you receive a payment in Dubsado, or if you get a signed contract in Dubsado, or the last one is if you have a project status that gets updated to a certain status, you can have something happen in another system. We're not going to be looking at that today because setting that up in Zapier is relatively simple. What I want to look at today is if you're using Dubsado as an action. That means that a trigger is coming from another platform. In this case, we're going to be doing it with Calendly. So when the trigger in Calendly happens, let's say a new appointment is booked, we want to then have something happen in Dubsado, the action. And the only action we have in Dubsado right now is that a new project can get created. So it doesn't matter what app you're using as the trigger. If something happens in Eventbrite, and let's say someone books an event in Eventbrite and you want something to happen in Dubsado, the only thing that you can do action wise is have a new project get created. So the example that we're using, a new appointment gets scheduled in Calendly, or you could even look at this as Acuity as well. And once that gets booked, we want a new project to get created in Dubsado. So that's the biggest difference between triggers and actions. We do have a help article. If you go to help.dubsado.com, we have a whole help article that talks about kind of the different triggers and actions and how all of those things work. So you're more than welcome to look at that to get a little bit more information, but we'll just keep moving through here. So let's talk about collecting sample data. So when setting up your Zapier is going to search your trigger app. So in this case, we're talking about Calendly or whatever app you're using as kind of your first piece, your trigger. So when setting up your Zapier is going to search for trigger app information or is going to search for sample data. So once we jump into actually looking at how this is built, it'll make more sense on what I mean by collecting sample data to help you build your app. So number one that I definitely recommend doing before you go in and set up your Zap, you will want to make sure you have everything set up in your two individual apps. So a perfect example is this. If you are planning on using Calendly as your trigger, you want to make sure that you have a Calendly inquiry form built. If you're trying to set up the Zap and you don't have a Calendly appointment that someone can book, a form that they fill out, then you're not going to be able to do this. So first and foremost, make sure you have something set up in both of your apps or that you're ready to go in both apps. So in Dubsado, to kind of tie this in, let's say we're booking something in Calendly, okay? So I want to, make sure that I have my inquiry form built in Calendly. On the Dubsado end, these 6 things are going to be things that you might consider getting set prior to building your Zap. So if you have workflows, so let's say that you're booking an appointment in Calendly, create a new project, and then you want a workflow to start in there. If you don't have your workflow built, then you're not going to be able to add it to this Zap. So it's important that you have your workflows built. If when someone books an appointment in Calendly and it's creating a project in Dubsado and you want it to go into a certain status, you want your project statuses built. Same thing with project sources or custom map fields. So there are a lot of things that you might want to consider getting built prior to setting up this Zap. It just kind of depends on how much information you want to be able to include in that Zap. So this is going to help out a lot. Once we actually get in and build this Zap, you'll be able to see why it's important that you have these things set up ahead of time. So number 2, before setting up a Zap, you will want to create sample data through your trigger app for Zapier to use. So let me explain what I mean by that. We're actually going to go to my Calendly inquiry page so you can see what I mean by that. So we're going to jump over to Calendly here. Actually, we'll start in Zapier so that way it makes sense what we're doing. So I'm going to start with Zapier and then we'll work our way to the Calendly page. So here in Zapier, this is going to be the main dashboard. And what you can do here is you can actually search your different apps here in the middle for what you want to connect this app with and connect it to this one. So you're able to do that here if you want to connect those 2 apps. What I'm going to do, just because I like the UI a little bit better, is I'm going to go up here to the top and I'm going to click Create Zap. And so when I do this, it's going to take me to the page where I can actually go in and build this, which it looks like I need to sign in. So give me just one moment here. I was signed in, but I guess it kept me from being signed in. So give me 1 second here while I sign in. And we will get started here. Give me just 1 second. I was all signed in and I guess it signed me out. Okay, perfect. So now it is open here. So let me go ahead and I'll share my screen with you again. My apologies. And we'll open this up here. Okay, perfect. So now we are on this main page here where you can actually go in and build your Zap. Now, the first thing I recommend doing is up at the top up here where it says name your Zap, you should do that. So up here at the top, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this Calendly to Dubsado, just so that I know what it's called. If I have a lot of different Zaps running, I'll be able to identify this a little bit better. So that's going to be the name of my Zap. Some people kind of skip over this step and they might have a lot of Zaps that are untitled. So definitely title your app up here so you know what it is that you're building. So the first thing that I'm doing here is underneath this app event, I'm choosing the trigger. So remember, we're going from Calendly to Dubsado. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to choose the app that I'm using as my trigger. So underneath here, remember, Zapier has 3,000 plus apps. So these are going to pull up some of the more popular ones like Slack, Google Calendar, Gmail, MailChimp. But if you search apps here, you can actually just find the app that you're wanting to use. So here's Calendly. So I can click that. And it's going to take me into this modal. So while I'm building this trigger, Zapier is actually really great at just walking you through this step by step. So you don't have to leave this page and go find other things. It literally just takes you through this step by step. So the next thing it's going to do is it's going to ask me, what trigger do I want to use in Calendly? So when I click this drop down, it's going to show me a list of what triggers are available in Calendly. So when Calendly made their integration with Zapier, these are the conditions that they built in for a trigger. So here we can either choose from an invitee gets created or an invitee cancels. So those are the two that we have to play with here. Now, obviously in this sample, we're going to do invitee created. And then we'll click continue because we're wanting it to be once they book an appointment. And that's what invitee created means. Then the next thing it's going to do here is it's going to ask what account you want to use. Now, this is what's really important. If you don't have a Calendly account, you'll need to sign up for one prior to building this Zap, because what this is going to do here is it's going to pull up all of the different accounts that you have linked up to Calendly. So if you don't have one, you'll want to make sure to get that set up first. That's another reason why prior to building this, I said go into both apps and make sure that you have things set up. So here, we'll click on this because this is the actual Calendly account that I'm going to be using, and we'll click continue. Once you do that, what Zapier is going to do is it's going to make sure that it can connect with that account that you put in there. So it actually says, we'll find a recent invitee in your Calendly account in this particular account to confirm that the right account is connected and your trigger is set up correctly. So what Zapier is going to do, it's going to go into my Calendly account. It's going to look for the most recent booking that I've had to make sure that it can connect properly. So we can click test trigger, and it's actually going to look at our Calendly account, and it's going to pull in the most recent booking that we've had. And here it's going to pop up here and you'll see the information. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this because this is an actual person, so I don't want to go through too much information here. But what I'm going to do, and this is what I encourage you all to do, is before you set up your Zap, go through and fill out this Calendly form so that you can pull in new sample data. This invitee A that you see right here is the most recent booking, but the data that's being brought in could be old. You could have redone your form since then. So maybe you don't want to use whatever the last one that was booked is, especially if it was booked a long time ago. So what I usually recommend doing is creating fresh sample data. And the way that you do that is by going into Calendly and actually booking an appointment, a fake appointment. By doing that, Zapier can then find the most recent, which would be what I'm filling out, and it can use that as sample data. So let me show you how to do that here. So I'm going to go to Calendly, and I'm in my Calendly account here. So I'm just going to book a 30-minute consult with myself. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pick a date. So let's say the 26th at 9:15 a.m. So I'm just going to pick that time and confirm it. And that's going to take me to my page where I'm going to fill out this information. Now, another great example of this is if you're using Acuity, you would go in and book an appointment for yourself. If, let's say, someone fills out like a type form or a Google form, and you want to bring that into Dubsado, you go to that trigger, whatever app that is, go to that form and fill it out so you can get fresh sample data. So first name here, I'm going to do Mickey Mouse is going to be my person. So Mickey Mouse, email, Mickey Mouse 123 at yahoo.com. I don't know if somebody actually has that email. If they do, we're going to be using it. So I'm going to put that as the email. Phone number, we'll do 818-555-55 and so on. So that's going to be my phone number. What email do you use to log into Dubsado? So the questions that are being asked right here are actually questions that we ask our users when they're booking appointments with us to do one-on-one sessions. So this is pretty much the exact same here. So if we go here, what email do you use to log into Dubsado? I'm actually going to use my Dubsado email. The reason why is because when we're going to map the data, which is the next step of this Zap, I want to be able to tell the difference between these two emails. So they might be the same, but I'm going to use different ones just so that you can see where we're collecting this information from. So I'm just going to use a different email there. What industry are you in? We're going to say entertainment because it's Mickey Mouse. So entertainment there. Please provide a detailed description of what you're needing assistance with. I would like an expert to audit my workflow. So let's just say that's a description of what it is that we're going to do on this consultation. Who will be joining the call is a question that we ask. Is it the brand owner, the assistant, or is it the brand owner and the assistant? So we're just going to click brand owner. And then we have just some kind of disclosure things. I understand it's not a full walkthrough. This is not a technical support question. And then we have a cancellation policy. And so we'll just click I understand on all of these things. Send text messages to. So if there's a text message reminder, we'll do the same number here. And we'll just plug that in. So all I'm doing here is I'm just going through and I'm filling this out, and I'll click schedule event. Okay. So I just booked an event with myself using one of the appointments that I have on my Calendly. Now, if we jump back to Zapier, if I click this drop down here, this is the only invitee that is in Zapier right now. It's that most recent one from the last time that something got booked. If you click load more, that's actually going to go back to Calendly, look for the most recent booking and bring that in. So you can see right here that this was pulled a second ago, invitee B. So the reason I recommend creating a sample data or going through and creating a test first is because now if we use this invitee B, which is technically our fake one that we just made, I can use this for all of my information. So let's walk through this here since I know that this is a fake person. What Calendly did, or what Zapier did rather, is it looked at Calendly and it brought in all of the information that we can now use to create our Zap. So here you can see who it was assigned to, myself. You can see other information like email. You can see the start time. You can see the end time of the appointment. If you scroll down a little bit farther, you can see all of the invitee information. So you can see Mickey Mouse, you can see the email that they used, you can see the text reminder number, you can even see the time zone when it was created. So that's all that Zapier is doing right now. It's looking at Calendly, it's picking up all that information that we just filled out. This is your sample data. Once you have this, and I'll actually scroll down a little bit further here, you can also see that it's pulling in what is your phone number, what email do you use, what industry are you in, please provide a detailed description. So it's literally pulling in all of that data here. And once we compile all of that, we can use this in our Zap. So once we have that done, we'll click continue. And once we do that, we have our trigger done. So it has everything that we need. We have that sample data, and we're going to use that in this next step. So let's pop back over to the outline here, and let's talk about mapping sample data. So we collected our sample data in Calendly. Now we're going to map it into Dubsado. So a better way to phrase this is that we are going to actually take that data from Calendly, and we're going to decide where this is going to plug in Dubsado. So we're basically going to say, okay, we want this to be the client's first name. We want it to be the last name. This is going to be the email when a client inquires. So we're basically going to map all of that into our Zap. Number 4 is basically building the rest of the Zap. So part A is collecting, part B is mapping. So now if we jump back over to Zapier here, now we want to pick what action app we're going to use, which is going to be Dubsado, because we have our trigger app. Now we're going to go to our action app. So when I type in Dubsado here, you'll see that that pops up. So you can search for whatever app it is that you want to use. So once we do that, now it's going to ask you, out of the actions that are available as far as Zap actions that you can choose from, which one do you want to do? Remember from earlier, the only one that we have right now in Dubsado is create project. So the only thing we can really put together with Dubsado being the action is something happens up here, and then we create a project in Dubsado. So we'll click continue. And now we're actually going to build this in. So the next thing it's going to do here is it's going to ask you which account you want to use. Now, I want to take a brief second here before we dive into this to talk about actually integrating Zapier with your Dubsado account. Inside of Dubsado, up at the top underneath the settings tab, and then if you go to the integrations tab, which is right here, this is going to be where you can link up your Zapier account. Now we have a whole help article on generating tokens and doing all of that. So I don't want to actually get into that piece of it because we have help information on there. So if you go to help.dubsado.com, there's actually a help article that shows you how to generate the tokens and actually get it into Zapier. So we won't actually go through that just because I already have an account linked up. But another thing that I want to stress here is that if you have multiple brands in Dubsado, so I have multiple brands up here, each brand can be connected to your Zapier account individually. So if I have certain Zaps running in this brand and I want different Zaps running in another brand, I can do that. So each brand that you have in Dubsado has kind of its own ability to be connected to Zapier individually. So those are two things that I wanted to stress there before we move forward. So in this Dub Demo brand that I have, I've connected my Zapier here. And so we're actually going to be using the Dub Demo account to do this. So when I go back to Zapier here and it asks you, which Dubsado account do you want to use? When I click this drop down, it's going to bring up all of the different accounts or brands that you have linked up to Zapier. So if you have 8 brands and all of those are connected, you can pick which one you want to use. Now, this one at the bottom, this Dub demo, that's going to be the one that I want to use, basically saying, when I create this Zap, I want it to go into this brand in my Dubsado account. I don't want it to go to a different brand. I'm choosing the brand that I want. Now, one other thing, and then we'll continue. If you only have one Dubsado brand, then you'll see how easy this is, because if I click that drop down, it's going to be the only one that shows up. So this is more for people who might have add-on brands, who might have connected multiple ones. You can choose which account it's going to go into when you build this. So we'll go ahead and we'll continue, but I've picked which account it's going to go into. So once we've done that, now this is probably the most difficult part of building the app, or sorry, of building the Zap, is mapping this information in. Before I dive into this, again, when we go through here, you're going to see why it's important that you build things ahead of time before going in and setting up this Zap. So the first thing it's going to ask me is, what workflow is it that you want to start? So let's think about this for a second. An invitee gets created in Calendly, someone books an appointment, it creates a project, and now it's asking me, once that project gets created, what workflow do you want to start in that project? So when I click this drop down, it's going to show me all of the workflows that I have in this brand. I have a lot in this brand, but if you don't have a workflow built yet, then you can't assign this to this section here because you don't have it built. So that's why I was stressing beforehand, make sure your workflows are ready to go first. The one that I'm going to use is I actually have a Zapier demo workflow. So we're going to use that one. You can search up here if you have 1,001 workflows like I do. Instead of scrolling through all of these, you can just type up here, and here's my Zapier demo workflow. And we're going to look at this once we actually set up this Zap. So I'll go into the workflow specifics a little bit later. So I'm going to choose this, and this is going to be the workflow that starts in the project once this happens. Okay. Now, the next thing that it's going to ask me is project location. What we're doing is we're going to decide now, out of the information that we collected from the Calendly form, all of that information, first name, last name, their email, when the appointment was booked, all those different things, we're going to map that into where it's going to be in Dubsado. In that inquiry form that we filled out, we didn't ask for any project location information. So I actually don't need to do anything with this section, because on my Calendly form, I never asked for anything that is about project location. So I can actually skip over this information. If you don't see anything on here that says required, you are not required to map every single line. There's only one, I believe, which is the email, is the only one that's required, but you definitely want to do first name and last name so that you have a client on the project. But the big takeaway is if it doesn't say required, you don't have to put something there. If I'm not asking for project location information on this, then I don't need to map it because it's not important. So project location information, I'm just going to skip past all of this because I don't need it. The next thing it's going to ask me is, what is going to get mapped into the alternate contact spot in Dubsado? If you remember from the inquiry form, I didn't ask for any additional guests or a spot for somebody else in there. So alternate contact information, I don't need either. So we can actually skip through the alternate contact information because it's not pertinent to that Calendly form. The next section is going to be client address. Now, maybe on your type form or your Acuity form or your Calendly form, maybe you're asking for the client's address. In that case, you would use these spaces. I didn't ask for that, so I can actually skip through this portion as well. I know you're saying, well, when do you actually use it? We'll get there in a second. So we'll scroll past address because we don't really need that information. But if you did need it, you could map it. The next thing is client company information. We didn't ask for that either, so we can actually skip through those lines there. Now, the next thing is project statuses, okay? Now, for those of you who are not familiar with project statuses, let me give you a quick crash course. In Dubsado, if we jump over to Dubsado and go to the projects page, your project statuses across the top up here is basically where the client is at in your overall business process. So I have different statuses across the top up here. I have if they're a new inquiry, awaiting booking, consultation booked, follow-up, needs proposal. You can see that this is actually the timeline that people go through in my process. So for those of you who are wanting to build these out, you can do that underneath the customize button over here on the right-hand side. I don't have enough time to deep dive into project statuses, but two takeaways. Number one, they're the different milestones that your client goes through in the process that you have. If you click customize, here's where you can actually build them. So up here at the top, this is where you can actually build those statuses. But if we go back to the projects page, Calendly is going to ask right here, when someone books an appointment in Calendly and a project gets created in Dubsado, what status do you want them to go into? When I click this drop down, it's actually going to bring up all of the statuses that I have created in my Dubsado brand. So if I go back to Dubsado here, you'll see all of these across the top. It's pulling those from Dubsado into Zapier here. So let's think about this process for a second. They schedule an appointment in Calendly, then they come into Dubsado. So what status should they be in at that moment? Should be in consultation booked, because when they come into Dubsado, that's where they're at in my timeline. So everyone who books an appointment in Calendly, when they come into Dubsado as a project, they're going to go into consultation booked. Now, again, I'm going to reference what I said earlier, that if you don't have your project statuses built, then you can't assign them. So that list of 6 things that I had up on that outline, make sure you go through and get some of those things set up. So that way, when you come into Zapier, you're not having to go out of Zapier, build those certain things and come back into Zapier here. The next thing is project source. Now, project source in Dubsado, let me jump back over to Dubsado here. Underneath the reporting section, and if you go to project sources, this is going to be where you can create where people heard about you. So if you're trying to figure out where am I getting a lot of my traffic from, you can create project sources, and that's actually going to be where you can collect that data. So you can create your project sources here, and what you can do in Zapier, if we jump back there, is you can assign your different project sources to go into this section. Now, there's something that's a little tough about this, and you kind of have to look at it from a 30,000 foot view. If this Calendly page that I have that people are going to be filling out, if those are on multiple places, then I can't just say everything that gets booked from Calendly is going to be coming through Facebook, unless that's the only place that I have that page. So you kind of have to be careful with sources, because if you have this page, the Calendly page, on 9 different sections, you can't really tell it here in this space that it's going to go with this certain source. That's actually something you can do later that we'll talk about. But in this section, I'm actually going to leave this blank for right now. So You have this here, project source, title. Now let's talk about the title. This section right here, you can see it says required over here. This section is going to be what is going to be my naming convention when my projects come in. So when I'm on my projects page in Dubsado, if I jump back over there, when I have my projects getting created here, what I'm doing in Zapier is I'm deciding how my project titles are going to look as they come in. So when I'm in Zapier here and I go underneath my title, there's a couple things that you can do here. You can either choose from the information that's available. So if you wanted to use, the invitee's name in the title, which I'm going to in a second, so you can see if you want to use the time on when it's actually going to be, if you want to use their last name, or if you want to use some of the answers that they put in here, you can actually put this in the title. So let me give you a good example here. Let's say that I just wanted all of my projects, when they come in, I just want it to be the client's name, and that's going to be the project title. If I click on this, this is going to plug in the invitee's name every single time. It's not going to put Mickey Mouse as the title every time. It's going to put the invitee name. Why that says Mickey Mouse is because what Zapier is wanting you to see is what sample data is being pulled in at that point. So whatever they put in, that's going to be their first name and last name combined is going to be the title of that project. Let's say that I wanted to do the title and I also wanted to do something else. So I could do title and then maybe, actually, let me put this in here. We'll do title and then maybe I'll put a dash in here and then I can put in the event type name. So whatever the event name is, whether it's a 30-minute consultation or a 60-minute consultation, whatever the event name is, that could be brought in. So you can use all of the information from your sample data to basically build the structure of your lead title. The other thing that you can do here is you can actually type in here. So let's say that I wanted every single project that comes in to be new lead dash, and then we'll put in the name, okay? So basically what this means is that every single person who comes in, the project title is going to say new lead dash, and then it's going to fill in whatever the name of the person is that booked. So you can write in there if you want to, just know that that's going to be every project that comes in from this Zap. So you don't want to make this something super specific, like writing in 30-minute consultation and then something else if there's a lot of different appointments that can be booked. So if you do new lead and then the name, that's a good way so that it's kind of consistent every time you get a new inquiry. So we're going to leave it as that for right now, and you'll see it when it actually comes in. So we have new lead and then the name, start date. So with Dubsado, there's a project date for every single project. So if you want the time that they booked to be your project date, you can map that information in. Now, if you're doing, let's say, like a consultation, maybe you don't want to map that as the project date, because a good example would be like if you're in the wedding industry, the consultation date isn't the date that you want it to be for the project date. That's a different date. So you kind of have to pay attention. Do you want that consultation? Because that's what we're booking as a consultation. Do you want that consultation to be the project date? What I'm going to do is I'm going to say yes, just so that you can see what happens. So when I click this drop down, it's going to ask me here, out of all this information, what do you want to be the event date, or the start date rather? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this right here, the event start time. So I booked at 9:15 a.m. on my Calendly. And so now I can use this to plug in that date. Now, one thing before I move forward and actually plug this in, you'll notice here that there are actually two different versions of this. There's what's called the pretty version. So that says 9:15 a.m., Thursday, August 26th. It's written out really nicely. The other version is kind of this code, if you will, of the actual date. And let me explain the difference between these two. This right here is going to be code, it's actual date format for if you're trying to use charts, graphs, if you're trying, like, let's say you're bringing it over onto a Google spreadsheet and you want to map that information and build a chart, you'll want to use the data format of this date. I actually am going to use this for the project date so it can actually read that as a date and plug it in. When you would use the pretty version is, let's say you're wanting this to display as text in an email or in a text message and you want it written out really nicely, then you can use this pretty version. But anytime you're looking at the date as a format or a chart or a graph or anything like that, you want it to be this version, kind of the code version, if you will. So we're going to use this as the start date. Okay, then it's going to ask for the end date. So I'll click this drop down here and we'll scroll and we'll find the event end time. So it's a 30-minute consultation. So basically what it's putting in is 9:15 to 9:45. That's going to be my project date information essentially. Okay, so we have that plugged in. The next thing is going to be the client first name. So you can already start to get the idea here of what we're doing. We're just mapping sample data here. So when I click this drop down, it's going to ask me, what do you want to use as the first name? Well, we have it right, invite first name. So we'll click that. Then we'll do last name. So we'll click this here. And we'll go to last name, which is right here, invitee last name. So we're really just plugging and playing here. That's literally all we're doing. As long as you have that sample data first, you can see how easy it is to map this info. If I was using old data, it might not be exactly what I want it to be. So client email. Now the email's right here. Remember, we used this email as the first one. So we'll plug this in as the client email, and we'll get to the other one here in a second. Then it asks for phone number. We collected that on the form. If you remember, we collected the phone number. So when I click here, I can go down to their phone number. Now, remember what you can do, because I'm actually going to do it here versus scrolling, is you can actually search up here. So if I type in phone, it's going to bring up all of these different things here. Now, I don't actually see what I'm looking for here in this data. So what I can do here, let me type in answer, and it'll bring up some of the answers that I was using. But what we'll do here, let's type in question, and now it's going to bring up some of the questions and responses. So you can type in until you find the information that you're looking for. And right here, you'll see where it says 818, there's the phone number that we're looking for. So I can click this. And so whatever they wrote in that questions and responses in that space, that's going to map to the phone number. Okay. Next is custom map fields. This is another one of those 6 boxes that we were looking at that I recommend getting set up prior to building your Zap. Inside of Dubsado, we'll jump back over there really quickly so you can see where these map fields are coming from, these custom ones. In Dubsado, if you go up to the settings up here, and then you can go to custom map fields over here in your menu. This is where you can build in custom map fields. Now, Dubsado has some of the normal ones like first name, last name, email, phone. But if there's other information that you're wanting to collect that's not in Dubsado's general mapped fields, you can create custom ones. So you can see I have birthday, industry, I have underneath project, I have budget, requested date, guest count, all of these different things that I can collect information from. If we're in Zapier here, you'll see all of those listed here. Now, I didn't ask for their birthday, so I don't need to worry about it, but I did ask for their industry. So when I click this here, what I want to do, we'll just type in questions again, or actually it's right up here, not this space. I always do that. We'll type in questions, and it's going to bring up all the questions that I asked. And if you remember from that Calendly form, what I wrote in there was entertainment. So we'll click that here. And so whatever they write into what is your industry on my form, it's going to map that into my custom mapped field. So custom map fields are available when you're building your Zap. I didn't ask for budget, I didn't ask for guest count, and I didn't ask for requested date. So all of these I can leave alone. Once we've done that, now we can click continue. So we basically went through and mapped all of the information possible into what's going to happen in Dubsado. When you scroll through here, you'll see all of the spaces that we actually used. So all of these, we didn't map any information here. If you remember, we didn't map any of that. We did do project status, we did title. So as you can see right here where it says new lead Mickey Mouse, that's going to be what all of my projects sort of look like when they come in. So that title that we were talking about, before you even turn this Zap on, you can see what it's going to look like when it comes in for all of these bookings. Start time, end time, first name, last name, all of that good stuff there. This will show you all of the empty fields down here so you can see what you don't have mapped. Then what you're going to do here is you're going to click test and continue. So when you do this, what it's going to do is it's actually going to test this. It's going to take that sample data that we used, and it's actually going to try that Zap in Dubsado. And you can see right up here where it says a project was sent to Dubsado about 10 seconds ago. So here's what we can do. If we go to Dubsado, let's see if this Zap actually worked. So I can jump back over to Dubsado. I'll go to my projects page here, and I'll just refresh the page here just to make sure. But when we go to my projects page, what I should have is I should have a new project in my consultation booked section, which I do. So when I click this, you'll see that my project has been created here. So here's my project title, just like what it said it would do. New lead dash Mickey Mouse. This is the client on the project. This is the project date. We have a workflow that's been started. So now let's take this one step further. Let's click into this project and see some other information. So when we click into this, up at the top up here where the project date is supposed to be, you'll see that it was booked on August 26th. 9:15 to 9:45, so that actually put in the date for me. It has the project status there. It has the name, the email. It also has the phone number, and it also has the industry here. So all of this information right here is mapped to the right area. So it pulled that information in. The next thing is the workflow, because we haven't really talked about the workflow too much, so I wanted to talk about that. Remember that in my Zapier, when I was building it, I put in that Zapier demo workflow. Well, this actually started in here, and the first thing in this workflow was to send out a pre-consultation questionnaire. So let's think about this process again for a second. Let's take a 30,000-foot view and look at what's happening. A person books in Calendly, it creates a new project in Dubsado, the workflow starts, and the first action is to send them a questionnaire that they need to fill out before our consultation. So if we look at the email here, the email is going to say, Mickey, because that's the first name, I'm very excited to chat with you prior to our consultation. Please fill out the questionnaire below so we have a foundation to work off of during our chat. And there's a link to the pre-consultation questionnaire. So that workflow is once they book that appointment, the workflow is sending them what they need prior to the consultation. So That's all the stuff that we mapped into Zapier. And so we can see that this was a success. This looks great. So if we go back to Zapier here, I can turn on the Zap if I'm ready. I'm not ready to do it yet because there's one more thing that I want to show you here before we kind of close today. If I click close, that's basically going to take me back to here where it says, hey, your Zap is ready. If you want to turn it on, you can turn it on and it'll start running. Or you can go back to setup, which is actually what I want to do because there's one more thing I want to talk about before we end everything today. So if I want to turn it on, I can, but I'm going to go back to the setup here. So we have our invitee created in Calendly. We have create project in Dubsado. And there's one other thing that we're going to talk about, but I want to kind of explain something that has to do with the workflows just so that you understand what's happening here. You really should think about your full business process before adding automated workflows. Let me explain what I mean by that. If someone, let's just take an example here. Let's say you're trying to go from Eventbrite into Dubsado. So you have some event that you're throwing and they're paying for it in Dubsado, or sorry, in Eventbrite. So they pay for the event in Eventbrite. It creates a new project in Dubsado. That's your action. And then you could potentially have like a booked event workflow start. So whatever they need after they buy that event, you could have that in the workflow in Dubsado. That would make perfect sense. But if we go to this example, we really have to think about this. If they're booking a consultation in Calendly, then a project gets created in Dubsado. Then you have a workflow that automatically starts. You have to think about what the content is in that workflow. Let's say, for example, I have a workflow that starts with a proposal. So they book an appointment, the project gets created, and then I have a proposal that's set to go out basically when their appointment is over. I don't want that to automatically start because I don't even know how the consultation is going to go. So if you're using this for consultations, you have to be careful on what workflow is starting. In my example of the workflow, this is perfectly fine because I need them to get this before they actually do the consultation. So this is going to be something for the people that are using this for consultations. Only have something in the workflow that's automated based off of something they need prior to that consultation, tasks that you need to get done, questionnaires that they might need, emails that need to get sent out. If you're wanting to have a workflow start that sends out a proposal, you can see where it might get a little bit dicey because that's going to send this out before you even have the consultation. So what I usually recommend doing is, if you're not sending anything out here prior to that consultation, what you should do is not apply a workflow to Zapier. You should just have a Calendly to Dubsado Zap. You have the consultation with them, and then based off of how that consultation goes, then you can come into Dubsado and just manually apply your next phase of the workflow, because you don't know how that consultation is going to go. You don't want to have an automated workflow start the next phase before you even have that consultation or before you even know how that consultation is going to go. So always be mindful of, if I'm attaching a workflow, does it make sense in my full business process scope? Or should I just hold off on automated workflows and just wait till the consultation is over? And then based off of how it goes, maybe I could start a not a good fit workflow. Or maybe I have a workflow that they continue and get a proposal. Or maybe I have like a referral workflow where it sends them an email to somebody that I know. So you can actually have more control here by not having a automated workflow. And you could actually put in, once the consultation is over, based off of how it goes, which workflow phase do you want to start? So that's just some advice for you. Always think about your overall process from the beginning all the way through, okay? So the last thing that we're going to talk about, and then I'll open it up for questions here, is filtering. So if we're looking at this Zap right now, any appointment that is booked in Calendly. So just to give you a perspective on this, in this Calendly account, and this might not be the same for everybody, so I'll kind of talk about two things here. In this Calendly account that we linked up, the hello@dubsado.com, there are, I believe it's 4 or 5, I think it's 5 actually. We have 5 people who are in this Calendly account. What that means right now is that any person who has a call booked in Calendly, any person, whether it's myself or any of my colleagues, anytime a call gets booked in Calendly, it's going to commit this action. But let's say we don't want this to fire unless it's booked by me, unless I'm the person that's getting scheduled. What you will need to do is set up a filter. If you are wanting it to basically work off of a condition and only do this Zap if it meets this criteria, then you need to use filters. So here it's set up where any call will create a project. But what I'm going to set up right now is only if somebody books with me, not any of my colleagues, but only if they book with me, do I want a project to get created in Dubsado. So to better help you understand this, I'm going to give kind of an illustration here. But filters allow Zaps to only perform actions if the data from the app meets that condition. So what it basically is like this image right here. The trigger is going to go, so they're going to book an appointment in Calendly, and a filter is kind of like a stop sign. This car is going to pull up to the stop sign. It's going to see if those conditions are met. If they're met, then it's going to actually do the action. If those conditions are not met, then that action is not going to happen. So it's basically literally like a filter. So it's filtering out all the stuff that's not necessary, and it's only looking at the condition, okay? So let's go into Zapier here, and we're gonna build in a filter. So when I click this, you'll see that I have a little plus button that I can add. This plus button is actually going to work like this stop sign right here. So I'm going to go over to Calendly. I'm going to click this little plus button. And over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a filter. Now, one thing, and I'm actually just going to mention it right here. I was going to talk about this at the end of the webinar, but I'll just mention it right here. Filters are only available on paid Zapier subscriptions. So this is just something that is on the Zapier end. They only have filters available if you're on a paid subscription, and it's actually the starter plan or higher. So you have the free Zapier version, which you can get for free, but then the next plan up, a paid Zapier account, is the starter plan. You can either have filters from starter or any of the other plans, professional. I'm not sure what the other ones are called, but all of those plans that are on paid, you can use a filter. So I want to show you this just so you can see the power of Zapier. So if I click on filter here, what it's going to do is it's going to bring up how I'm going to set my parameters here. So this is going to tell me I'm only going to continue this Zap if it meets whatever conditions I put in here. So basically what I'm doing, if I'm using the same analogy, is I'm building my stop sign right here. I'm building the conditions that need to be met in order for this Zap to continue. It's kind of that middle ground there. So what we're going to do here are 3 different sections. The first thing is called the field. This is going to be, it's going to look at a certain field in Calendly. So when I click this drop down, it's actually going to show me all of these different fields that I can play around with, kind of like when we were building our Zap. So if we scroll down here, you'll notice that there's an option here that if the event is assigned to, and that could be something that we look at for data because we're trying to get this filter in place where only if the event is signed to me do I want it to continue. So because that's my stipulation, I want to go to the field that has to do with who's getting assigned to this particular call. You could do it where only if the name is a certain person that this goes through. There's all of these different things. You could do it where only if the event type is this type of event do I want this to go through. There's a lot of different things that you can do here, but we're going to use my example. So we're going to go back down to event assigned to. So when it gets to this stop sign, Zapier is going to look at Calendly and it's going to zero in straight on that. Who is this assigned to? That's what it's going to be looking at when it sees if this should go through or not. So the next thing it's going to do is ask for the condition. In this drop down here, this basically gives you where you can decide what the condition is. Does the event that's assigned to contain certain information? Does it not contain certain information? Does it exactly match this information or not match? There's a lot of different things that you can play around with. But what we're trying to do here is we want it to be set up where if the event is assigned to me, then we want it to continue. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say exactly matches. And so what we can do is we can say event assigned to exactly matches, and I can actually put in information here. I could still, click on some information, but what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to write in my name. So basically what this is saying, what we've put together here is event assigned to exactly matches my name, basically saying if it does not have my specific name in the assigned to area, then do not run this Zap. This is very important to get correct if you're typing in here. If I actually put in 2 N's on accident, it's going to look at that Zap and say that's not the exact name, so we're not running this. So you want to be careful when you're doing this, that whatever you put in here is exactly, if that's what the condition is that you're using. You could do contains. That's a little bit less aggressive. So if it contains Cameron, then run it. That would still work. But if I have, let's say, 2 Camerons on the team, then I need to be more specific. So I'm going to do exactly matches, and I'm going to say my full name there. You can also build more filters. So you could say the event is assigned to me and something else. So you can build in multiple conditions if you want to, or you could do event is this, or it's this. So let's say, for example, that I only want this Zap to go through if it matches either me or another team member. So I could say event is assigned to either me, or I could say if the event, and we'll go down to assigned to here, or the event is assigned to exactly matches. Maybe if I have a person on my team named Travis. So now here's what it's going to do. It's going to look at that appointment. It's going to say, is the person that's assigned either Cameron or Travis? If it matches either one of those conditions, we're going to run it. If it doesn't, it's not going to happen. So this is where you get a little bit more control over your Zap versus if you didn't have this filter, it's just every single call that gets booked. So you can see why maybe this is important if you only want certain things going through. So if we do this and we click continue, what it's going to do is this. It's going to look at the sample data that I just filled out. So it's looking at it right now, and it's looking to see if that would match up, which you can see here. Yes, your Zap would have run. Now, here's the most important thing. You don't want to get too tied up in this, because let's say when I was filling out my sample data or let's say in this filter here, if I have this set as Travis, okay? If I say that any event that's booked with Travis, I want this to go through, and I click continue, it's going to tell me that this would not have continued because the sample data didn't match Travis. Now, here's the thing. This doesn't mean that your Zap is wrong. This just means that when it's looking at the sample data, that it would not have run. You shouldn't be too tied to this portion right here, because this right here is going to say, oh, the sample that you made, that would not have gone through. But if some real person booked, that would absolutely go through. So don't get too tied to this, because it's only looking at the sample data that you're using. So if I change this back here, and I'll put my name back in there and continue, it's going to look at that sample data again and say, oh yes, that last one from Mickey Mouse, that would have went through. So that's basically, if we close this up, that's how you can build a filter in there so that only specific things are actually going to pass through this filter and run inside of Dubsado. And in the outline that I have a actual breakdown here of what I just talked about. So if you download that outline, it kind of gives you a definition of each one of these different fields here. So the last thing, and I'll just say it one more time, is that filtering is only available on a paid Zapier subscription. So you can actually sign up for Zapier if you want to do it where you only have the action, or sorry, the trigger and the action, and every single thing goes through. You can definitely do that. But if you want to use those filters, if you need those, you will have to be on the bare minimum Zapier paid plan. And I have it written in here that it's the starter plan or higher. So that is everything that you need to know in order to connect Dubsado to Zapier, at least to get you started.